welcome to another Animation Friday. I'm sorry that this video is being uploaded late. Unfortunately, my computer needed to be checked to make sure that there are no bugs or any kinds of viruses, and so it's all good and clean up, and so I'll be ready for today to pick up from Fridays, Saturdays, and up to Sunday's video. So without further ado, let me discuss what I wanted to address for this Animation Friday, and that is the best animated sequels, at least in my opinion. Now, I think a lot of animated sequels have proven to be not as well constructed as the originals. I think I've discussed in the past within a previous video how a lot of the times animated sequels usually don't turn out as well done as the really original concept or idea. And I think it's largely due to the fact that a lot of animated sequels don't expand upon the idea into which the animated film was created in. And I think also since animation in particular as sort of an art form tries to end itself towards the ending of a film with a fairly highly satisfied and feel-good ending, and that's largely based within a lot of kids' films. There's not really room to branch out and to really expand upon the ideas presented. But there are definitely some big exceptions here, and I'm going to be discussing the ones today that do reflect onto, I think, being ultimately not only a better product than the original, but actually expanding upon what the original ultimately was trying to convey. So without further ado, let me address these right out of the gate with the Toy Story sequels. Now, I think personally from a story standpoint, a character standpoint, and a writing standpoint, I think the two Toy Story sequels are superior to the original Toy Story film. I think that's largely to do with the fact that the first one feels very standard. You've got your protagonist, you have your antagonist. It's kind of a clearly fleshed out story and a little adventure to go along with it. And the way in which the toys are captured and all of that sort of plays out in a similar respect to, I think, a lot of other films, not just animated, but films in general. It felt like it had all of the good elements of a film that I think a lot of people are fairly familiar with. And that's why I think the first Toy Story, although it is very good, is not in the same league as the sequels, because not only did the sequels expand upon the story and the characters and sort of the universe of this sort of world where toys come to life, but you feel like that the stories are trying to become a little bit more elaborate. They're trying to become a little bit more complex. Even though you have sort of a bad guy, he's not really the main center focus. It's more about, the toys sort of making decisions, which does exist within the second as well as third installment. Now, the interesting thing too is the reason why I didn't choose between the second and the third is only because I feel like they both kind of go on to that same level. I don't think the third is really all that superior to the second, and I don't think the second's really all that superior to the third. I just think that they expanded upon the Toy Story universe in different ways, and in doing so, I think really do maintain the same level of quality. I think as far as when I look at them, because when I look at the first Toy Story, I see a very good product, obviously a classic, but at the same time, it's not as expansive, it's not as detailed, it's not as I think, as interesting as what the sequels sort of brought to the table. Um, and although, again, I do enjoy the first film immensely, I don't think it is in that kind of same category as the other two. Although I'll label them all as classics, I still feel like when I look at these films over and have to pick out which are the superiors, I would say the second as well as the third film do, I think, branch out a little bit more. And you feel that there's a little bit more depth to the characters and a little bit more of a more interesting dynamic. Because it's no longer a conflict about the toys sort of, battling each other over so much as they're trying to sort of, survive and try to stop all of the negative forces that are sort of coming in their way. And I think it just makes it seem less petty, less childish, I think, in a way. Makes it feel more adult. So I just think that there's a lot of elements that exist within the sequels that just feel like that it was adding on to something more than what the original Toy Story did. Although what the first Toy Stories did was really good, regardless. Now the next film that I wanted to briefly address is Shrek 2. Although I did mention in a previous video where I discussed them both as being classics in the same way that I put all the Toy Story films as classics, I do think that Shrek 2 is the superior product. Reason being is that not only does it expand more, provide new characters, give us a very interesting lineup and story, but I felt like that there was a lot more interesting messages that existed within the second film that, although maybe similar to what the first film was trying to say, I still think in the second film they resonate more because the way in which the film is overall executed is done in a more elaborate and more interesting way, as opposed to the first film where you feel like it's very introductory, it's very standard as far as trying to get the world across to people. The second film really not only expands upon it, but creates this very elaborate and interesting way of approaching what initially was kind of presented within the first film, but again, expanding on it and making it more interesting, and I think a lot more entertaining maybe to watch as far as story and characters are concerned. But they still are both good in the sense of that they really set DreamWorks on a roll, and they really do seem to be the ones that really stand the test of time as far as DreamWorks films are concerned, particularly their animated films. But the second film, I think, when you really look at the way in which it's constructed, it's a lot more, there's just more things that are going on, and there's more stuff that ties in with everything, and it sort of creates something completely new in a way, because you would think with the ending of the first Shrek film that there wouldn't be another film, like there couldn't possibly be some other film to try and, outdo what the first Shrek really did, but fortunately, DreamWorks, I think, definitely proved the public wrong on that, and they really did go full force into the second film. So even though both of them, I think, are considered classics in the respect of a DreamWorks animated film, I still think that overall the second film, I think, leaves a deeper impression than the first. But at the same time, I would definitely say that both of them are worthy of being considered classics among DreamWorks. Not only because they were nominated and won the first ever Best Animated Film, but also because they were really big box office numbers for DreamWorks, and they really gave them the advantage that they needed. Sort of similar to how Snow White sort of set Walt Disney on a roll when that film came out. Next one I wanted to mention is second to last, actually, is Fantasia 2000. This is not to say that this one is superior in any way to the first Fantasia, but it does offer something that's unique and interesting. I almost feel like this is the sequel that wasn't really trying to be the first film, Fantasia. I think it was trying to expand upon the concept of Fantasia, but not necessarily try to compete against the first Fantasia. Again, it's sort of like bringing in similar ideas and concepts and making sort of a sequel out of it, but that sequel is not really tied in with anything that the first Fantasia was, what really the first Fantasia provides. So I'm almost going to argue that this is kind of like a separate sequel sort of project that somewhat ties into the original, but yet doesn't. The reason why I say that is because largely Fantasia in particular, the first film, is very deep and heavy. There's a lot of different kinds of sceneries that they try to set up. There's just a lot of elaborate emotions of drama and of wonder and magic. You feel like that there was a lot of artistic elements associated with Fantasia that were trying to be unique for its time, and bring something interesting and different to the table as far as animation. And animation was really in that experimental stage during this time. But when Fantasia 2000 comes out, it's obviously not in that same league, not only because animation has existed for so much amount of time, but also because it's not trying to really it's not really trying to grasp, I think, what the first Fantasia was trying. It wasn't going for the same kind of a thing that the original Fantasia was going for. And in that sense, I think this is what makes Fantasia 2000 unique. It has all these different kinds of styles of animation. There's a little bit of computers drawn in there, and then there's also 2D, and there's little more. Some of them are animations are a little bit more sketched. There's a lot of more variety as far as animation is concerned within this sequel that does not exist within the first Fantasia. So it is adaptive in the sense of the era that it's in, where it has a lot more to play with, and at the same time, it is a little bit more lighthearted. It's not trying to engross you in the same way that Fantasia, I think, does. But at the same time, it's unique in its own interesting way. So that's why I think it stands out as a sequel, because it's not trying to be what the first film is, and it can't be what the first film is, but at the same time, it does offer something different, and there's, again, a lot of different kinds of perspectives that sort of exist within the sequel that you don't really see too often within Fantasia, only because, again, we have this very expanded kind of genre of animation where there's a lot more into which the animators can play with, unlike when Fantasia came out and animation was in a very experimental stage, and a lot of it was based on this very very narrow point idea of artistry. But again, and it's no way anyway superior to the first film, but I will argue that it stands out in its own unique way, and I don't think it was designed to compete with the first Fantasia. It was just designed to be a sequel to Fantasia and pay sort of homage to it, but at the same time not really compete against it, just kind of bring something new to the table, while conveying the importance of what made animation really cool and interesting in the first place. So that's all I think I can say about that one, without really giving too much away as far as what it has to offer as a sequel. And the last one I'm going to mention is Rescuers Down Under, which I think I did cover in a previous video as to what this film in particular is about, but it is a sequel to the first Rescuers film. And this is one where I believe this one is superior to the first, only because it has a better story. It's just constructed in a way that allows you to really enjoy the animation, but at the same time you have a story that flows well. You have likable characters, you have an interesting location, Australia. You know, you feel like that this was something sort of new, and it didn't try to really take too much from the initial film, except really the main characters, if anything, the two mice. And I think that's really why this film really did ultimately work, and it didn't because it didn't try to be like the first film. And there was a little bit more consistency, and there was just a lot more of a weight to the story. There was more emotions tied in with it, and the animation really shows you that. And I think it really is what made these things, I think, ultimately are what made this film better than the first, and were a great addition. But yeah, those are all of the animated films that I kind of wanted to discuss for this Animation Friday. I'm sure there's others that you could say are probably better or have a certain amount of quality to them that might be superior to the first. Again, I'm not too familiar with a lot of DreamWorks films, but usually when I see them, I feel like a lot of the times they just kind of even out for me. But yeah, these are really ultimately all of the films that really stood out to me as being great works and interesting and unique from the first film, or the film that it was trying to draw inspiration from. But yes, I think that's really ultimately all I can say for this Animation Friday. However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.